What's going on, everybody? Back with book review number 3 of the new year. This is both an autobiography as well as a plan for really the future of our country in many ways. This is called Because They Hate, A Survivor of Islamic Terror Warns America by Brigitte Gabriel. Brigitte Gabriel, for those of you who don't know, is the founder and CEO of Act for America, which ACT is an acronym for the American Congress of Truth. And Brigitte Gabriel is Lebanese, originally from the town of Marja Youn, Lebanon. She makes a point early on to say that people who are Lebanese are not the same as people who are Arabic. Arabics come from the Arabian Peninsula, she says, whereas Lebanese people like herself are the descendants of the ancient Phoenicians. Just to kind of throw that out there, a disclaimer right away, because she's very particular about that. Although Arabic is the main language that is spoken along with Aramaic and Greek. Those are the 3 languages of the country, and then English is kind of a second language. Now, Because They Hate. I could vividly imagine. I could literally see in my head as I was reading things that she talked about. I laughed, I cried. It's a tough story because a good chunk of her life, matter of fact, growing up, she lived through a lot of terror by the PLO at the time, as well as Hezbollah and other organizations. And the reason she says that her country fell apart, for a lot of people who don't know, and she tells about it in her book, Lebanon used to be a majority Christian nation until recent decades. There were Muslims, yes, and there were Druze as well. And there were different types of Christians, mostly Catholic and Maronite Lebanese Christian. But they decided to have open borders. They decided to do a lot of the policies that the current administration of this country is doing now. And a couple of administrations before him, before now former President Trump decided to build the wall and decided to put travel restrictions on it. A lot of people think that that's controversial. I was not a big fan of either this president, vice president, or the administration before them, but I do have to concede the reality that, there were things that, there were some valid points, and she points it out in the book. This actually came out originally in the early 2000s, I believe. There's a 2006 edition, and then there was a 2008 edition. Now, you have to understand, this woman growing up, spent 7 years of her life living in a bomb shelter, okay? And there was a time where she writes she is the only child of elderly parents who have since passed away and were buried in Israel, which she gets into later on. But she had to live, when you're living in a bomb shelter for 7 years and you have to crawl in a ditch to get to a spring of water because there are snipers on the mountains surrounding your town that are ready to shoot you and your family, how she lost her first love before she met her husband is a heartbreaking story. And you may have heard of her, and you may not like how she does things. You may disagree with her heavily on a few things. But let me tell you something. If you read her story, if you read Because They Hate, and you read what she had to go through, how she had to change her name when she worked for Israeli television on an Arabic-speaking channel, when you read about what happened to her parents, when you read about what happened to her community, when you read how, again, how she lost her first love and what happened when she moved out and came here to the States, when you read these things, you start to understand why she says what she says and why she's so, some would say vivacious, but also why she's very sprightly. Like, she's got a lot of fighting spirit. No question about it. She talks a little bit how she's had to deal with post-traumatic stress and someday still does, because there are certain things that she still is working through because of what she experienced during the Lebanese Civil War. And she says that it was a civil war and a conflict that most of the world forgot in many ways, which sounds familiar to another conflict and another catastrophe that happened later on. And she argues that there was a forgotten genocide that happens. She makes the point of saying that there were 100,000 estimated Lebanese Christians that were slaughtered during that time. Whether people would consider that a genocide or not, I certainly would. But I leave that to the reader to decide and read for yourself. It's hard for me to talk about this particular book because there's just so much in here. So much sadness, so much challengingness, and also some controversial decisions. And even I'll admit, when she suggests, what her warning and what her suggestions are controversial no matter what side of the aisle you're on. Even if you're like me and you're an independent conservative, there are certain things that I'm just kind of like, I get where you're coming from and I understand that, but I don't know. But I still think it's worth the read. If you want to stretch yourself, if you want to understand where she's coming from, if you've ever heard of Brigitte Gabriel but you don't know her story, read Because They Hate. That's my third review for today. I hope you folks who watch these videos will read these books, will make up your own minds, and will continue to learn to be objective and to use critical thought in order to stretch your mind and to see the world in a different way. It's my last review for today, and hopefully there will be more to come as the year goes on, Lord willing. It's Bobby G. Thanks for watching my book review. Peace.